Happy Sabbath. Before we actually get into the message, I just want to ask that you can bow your heads with me as I pray. We can all pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you that we can be here, Lord, today in your church. Please speak to us through your word, and please encourage us, Lord, to have a deeper experience with you in these last days. And I pray, Lord, please, that you can help me, Lord, to become more and more like you. We can help all of us here to become more and more like you and to enter into a far deeper experience, a far deeper prayer life. I pray this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So I've entitled this message, A Deeper Prayer Life, or another title would be A Deeper Experience. So I want you to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 26. We're going to go basically through all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. But mainly Matthew chapter 26 will be the main chapter that we're going to look into here. Matthew chapter 26. And we're going to be going to verse 36. Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. Through to verse 46. It's basically the story of Gethsemane. And we're going to look at other parts of basically Jesus' experience after that. We're going to focus on verse 36 through to verse 46 just for now. The Bible says in verse 36, are we there? Are we actually there? Yep, we're there. Verse 36. Then comes Jesus with them into a place called Gethsemane, and he says unto his disciples, sit here while I go and pray over there. I'm just sort of basically translating from the King James Version into modern English. Verse 37. He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and very heavy. This is what the King James is saying. Basically very sorrowful, very weighed down with sorrow and grief. Verse 38. And he says to his disciples, he says, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. Verse 39. And he went a little further, and he fell on his face, and he prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Now, when you read the Gethsemane experience and the crucifixion experience, I think it's so powerful. I was really blessed when I read the chapters Gethsemane and Calvary in the book The Desire of Ages, and it just brings so much more details out, and it goes into real depth about what actually happened. And I remember reading the book The Desire of Ages about this experience, basically those verses that we've just read where Jesus is saying, I'm exceedingly sorrowful, watch and pray with me, right? It was the author of that book was saying, for the first time really at that point, Jesus was in his humanity, he was longing, like absolutely longing for human sympathy. He desired more than ever before in his ministry for the actual sympathies of his disciples. Right? And he was like, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto the point of death. Pray with me, be with me. And so he says to them, watch and pray. He says to them, watch here with me, right? Verse 39. And he goes a little further and he falls on his knees and he says, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And he comes to his disciples after that first prayer. He comes to his disciples and he finds them asleep. And he says to Peter, what? Could you not watch with me? Could you not stay awake with me just for 1 hour? So he's longing for you could say their support, their spiritual support, their physical support, the emotional support. He's longing that they would, in this crisis hour of Jesus, that they would stay with him, pray with him, and be with him. And he comes back after that first prayer session, you could say, and he finds them asleep. Right? He finds them asleep. And it's like he's shocked. He's like, what? Could you not watch with me just for 1 hour? Because he understands the magnitude of the hour. They really don't. And he's shocked. Can you not stay awake for a little bit? So he goes back again. Right, sorry, no, verse 41, this is really important. He says, watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. Right? This was a crisis hour for Jesus. This was basically the climax of the reason why he was even here on earth in the first place. He was born into this world. He lived for 30 years. He began his ministry around age 30. And then at the end of that 3.5-year period, he's around about 33 years old. And he comes to the climax of the reason of why he's even here. This is it. This is why he's here. To become the sacrifice for sin. To become the Passover lamb. To become the ultimate sacrifice for evil. To become sin for us. That we might become the righteousness of God in him. That is why he's here. This is it. This is it. All those years, basically, it was leading up to this point. This was the crunch. And the reason why, brothers and sisters, he basically enters into this experience where his soul is exceedingly sorrowful. He's pleading with the disciples, stay with me, because right at this point, when he's entering into the Garden of Gethsemane, he's basically feeling, or beginning to feel, the weight of the sins of the world coming upon him. It's starting to happen. It's starting to begin. And he realizes it. He's feeling the separation between himself and the Father. He's understanding that this is basically the beginning of him becoming the sacrifice for the world. And this is why this is very, very serious for him. This is a climactic experience. He understands the magnitude of the experience. This is, in a sense, for him, an ultimate crisis for him. And in that experience, he pleads with his disciples, watch and pray. So he goes back again, the second time, verse 42. And he says, oh my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me except I drink it, thy will be done. And he comes to his disciples again in verse 43, and he finds them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. They were really tired, like I feel today. I'm really tired today. I've worked about 12-hour days nearly every day. I am stuffed. That's how I feel. I feel like them right now. They're really tired. He finds them asleep. Their eyes are heavy. Right? And in his mercy, he goes away the third time and he prays the same thing. He comes to his disciples again and he says, sleep on now, take your rest, behold the hour is at hand, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners, rise, let us be going, behold he is at hand that does betray me. This is interesting. This is Jesus' crisis hour, like I've just mentioned about 15 times. Now, I remember reading in that same book, The Desire of Ages, and you can draw this out of the scriptures, but the author made this really interesting point I thought was interesting. It was like, think about it, the disciples were the church of the day. They were it. They were the leaders of the church. That was the church. That was the Christian church. And what were they doing in that crisis hour? They were sleeping. They were sleeping. And the author of that amazing book, Desire of Ages, which I think is, apart from the Bible, obviously, one of the greatest books ever written about the life of Jesus. See, that sort of represents the condition of the church today, a sleeping church. Jesus is pleading with his people. He's pleading with his church. Pray with me. Connect with me. Spend time with me. Do you understand the hour in which we live on this earth? Do you understand what is going on? Do you understand what is going to take place? Pray with me. He finds them asleep. The church is sleeping today. And Jesus' command, or his advice, you could say, is watch and pray, lest you fall into temptation. Why? Because the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Now, what I'm going to do throughout this message, the whole point of this message is to basically compare the last hours of Christ's life and the last hours, well, basically the condition of the disciples at that time also, right? So this is Jesus' crisis experience. It's a crisis experience for the disciples as well, right? What did Jesus do? What did his disciples do? And what was the effect, right? What was the fruit? Now, I just want to go through 3 points that characterize the prayer life of Christ. Well, at least this prayer experience that Jesus had in Gethsemane. First point is this. The attitude of Christ when he was in Gethsemane was basically, not my will, but your will be done. Right? He was real with God. He came to God and said, this is how I feel. This is a reality. I don't want to go through with this experience. In the flesh, in my humanity, I don't feel like it. And I can understand. I would not feel like it. Would you, if you understood that you were going to become the sacrifice for sin, be cut off from the Father, be completely tortured, humiliated, hung naked and bleeding and bruised and spit upon on a tree, on a cross, your beard's been ripped out, you've got a crown of thorns that's been beaten into your skull, and also, that was not even the hard part. Basically, he was going through an agony on a soul level, on a spiritual level, on a mental, emotional type level, which was actually what really was the main torture for him. So all of that, he understands that that is basically going to be his lot if he actually accepts this and he goes through with this. He understands that. So he's real with the Father. He says, Father, is there any other way? If it is possible, let this cup pass from me, right? But he says, not my will, but your will be done. That is basically one of the foundational key principles of real prayer. Not my will, Father, but your will be done. That characterized the prayer life of Jesus, and especially this Gethsemane prayer. Another interesting point was this. It was an individual prayer. He prayed as an individual. Think about this for a minute. He goes into Gethsemane. Basically, his inner circle, his intimate inner sphere of influence, his inner social sphere, basically, the closest people to him were actually like, nah, we're going to fall asleep. This is like massive for Jesus. He's entering into this experience of becoming the sacrifice for the sins of all of humanity, and the disciples decide to go to sleep. The disciples don't really understand. They're off on a different planet, they don't really get it, they're not with it. And do you honestly think that this would have been hard for Jesus? It would have grieved his heart more than we could possibly even comprehend. But because he had actually made a decision every day of his life to connect with God in that crisis hour when everybody had rejected him, basically the closest people to him had rejected him, he still basically understood that the most important thing was his individual relationship with the Father. So he entered into that experience even though everybody had rejected him. Even though everybody had forsaken him, in a sense. It was an individual prayer life. Brothers and sisters, sometimes we are so influenced, distracted by other people. Somebody says something hurtful to us. Somebody's doing this or doing that. Or sometimes we can also sort of try to spiritually survive on someone else's devotion life or somebody else's prayer life or somebody else's spiritual experience. We can't. We can't. Jesus Christ had an individual experience and relationship with the Father. Jesus was earnest in prayer. Let's go to Luke chapter 22. I said that we will be going through different Gospels. We are. Luke chapter 22. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we're going to go to Luke chapter 22. And we're going to be reading. This is the passage about Gethsemane, and this is Luke's account. And Luke, just like, everything he writes about, he goes into extra detail. Luke chapter 22, verse 39 to 46, I'm only going to read verse 44. It says, verse 44, and being in agony, same experience at Gethsemane, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling to the ground. Now, Jesus entered, he understood basically he understood where he was at in his lifetime. He understood that he was right at the very end, and what did he do? He prayed the more earnestly, to the point where he was so earnest, that there was so much pressure, that he experienced basically a condition called hematidrosis, which is basically where the capillaries, or whatever they're called in your sweat glands, basically rupture and you actually sweat blood. It's happened to a few people in history, but Jesus obviously is the most famous account of this blood sweating, right? So he was earnest in prayer. He understood that he had to be earnest. This was a real serious experience. This was a real serious time for God, for Jesus. He was earnest in prayer. How earnest are we in prayer in these last days? How earnest are we in prayer? Now, those are some characteristics of Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane. Now, I just want to go through the effects of his prayer life, the effects of this Gethsemane prayer experience, and also what happened to the disciples as well. Right? So we're in Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, and we're going to read, we'll just read the whole thing, verse 39, verse 30, verse 46. It's not long. And he came out and he went as he was wont to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. Verse 40, and when he was at the place, he said unto them, pray that ye enter not into temptation. Verse 41, and he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, and he kneeled down and prayed. Verse 42, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Verse 43. And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. The disciples didn't pray, fell asleep. Jesus prayed, and an angel appeared from heaven to strengthen him in that crisis experience. God answers prayer, but we have to pray. Amen? We have to enter into that experience. God will come through. He will pull through. An angel comes and strengthens him. Now, when I was reading in the Desire of Ages, it went into detail about how the angel did not come to actually take away everything from him so he could just cruise on through. Basically, the pain was still there. Basically, the pain was still there. The agony was still there. But the angel came to basically take away from him the anxiety and the depression, and to strengthen him to basically go through with the plan of salvation. And when he left the Garden of Gethsemane, after the angel had strengthened him, it was like he had a newfound vigor and strength, a holy dignity upon his brow. That's what the Bible, that's what the Desire of Ages says, in the chapter of Gethsemane. And that was after he basically made the decision that I will save man at any cost to himself. So he prays to God, and the angel comes and strengthens him. Now, in the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verse 7, it says, "And the angel of the Lord encampeth around those that fear him." Right? In the Hebrew, it basically, what it's actually saying, it's saying the angels of God equip those people that fear him for war, for battle. And that's what the angel actually did to Jesus. The angel came and actually was saying, okay, I'm not going to, God's not going to take the cup from you. You still have to drink the cup. But I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to equip you for war. Because in a sense, this was spiritual warfare. This was a spiritual battle that he was facing. Basically, the eternal existence of the whole human race was on the line here. The angel came and equipped him for battle. And God does the same thing for us. When we pray, when we spend that time with the Lord, when we connect with God, angels of God equip us for battle, for warfare, strengthen us to face the Christian life, to live the Christian life, to do God's will. Powerful. The angel of the Lord came and equipped him for war. Now, another thing that I think is very powerful too, and it's in John chapter 18. We'll just go to John chapter 18 quickly. This is talking about the angel. John chapter 18. Same story. I'm just going to focus on one verse. John chapter 18. Verse 1 to, well, just verse 1 to whenever, you'll know, I'll stop. Chapter 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where was a garden into which he entered, and his disciples, and Judas also, which betrayed him, knew that place, for Jesus had often resorted there with his disciples. Verse 3. Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, he comes with them with lanterns and torches and weapons. Verse 4. Jesus therefore, knowing all this, that he knew all this should come upon him, he went out to them and said unto them, Whom do you seek? They answered him and said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said unto them, I am he. I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. As soon then as he had said this unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. Now, the book of John is the only gospel that actually goes into this detail. Think about it, they come to Jesus. He's left the prayer experience in the Garden of Gethsemane, equipped for battle, equipped for war. And they come to him, his enemies in a sense, his enemies. And he says, I am he. And they fall backwards. They fall backwards. Now, how did this prayer experience in the Garden of Gethsemane affect Jesus in these last moments of his ministry? And also, how did the neglect of prayer and the neglect of connection and communion with God affect the disciples in these last moments of Christ's ministry? We'll carry on. We'll go back to Matthew 26. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you know what it is, the New Testament. Matthew chapter 26. So we'll just read through the Gethsemane experience and we're going to carry on. Verse 47 and onwards. Jesus, just to set the context here, I want you to understand this. He's wrestled with God. He's entered into that experience. He's spent that time with the Father in this last moment of his ministry. He receives the blessing. He receives strength from heaven. And he leaves the garden. He leaves the garden. His enemies are coming for him. Here we go, verse 47. And while he yet spake, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. Verse 48, now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whosoever I shall kiss, that same as he, hold him fast. Verse 49, and forthwith he came to Jesus, and he said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. So Judas, one of his disciples, one of the 12, had walked with Jesus for 3.5 years, ate with Jesus, slept with Jesus, lived with Jesus, everything with Jesus. Now is betraying Jesus. He comes to Jesus and he says to the people that are with him, he says, by the way, the one that I kiss, that's him, take him. Verse 49, and forth he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. Verse 50, and Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Think about that. We probably don't really read that or really look into that in a deep way. Here is Judas, an enemy. An enemy. This person is coming to betray Jesus and lead him to his death. Jesus understands this. He's not ignorant of this reality. He's not like, oh, what's Judas doing? He understands this. He knows what's going to happen. He knows why Jesus is coming. He knows basically what's going on. And he says, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Now, I want you, we'll carry on here. Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then they came, they laid hands on Jesus, and they took him. And behold, verse 51, and behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand, drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear. Now, I want to go to Luke. Just go to Luke, just quickly. Go to Luke, chapter 22. Luke chapter 22. Just go back there. I told you we'd be going from place to place. Luke chapter 22. Here we go. Verse 49. When they which were about him saw what would follow, they said unto him, Lord, shall we smite with the sword? And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus said, suffer ye thus far. Basically saying, stop it. And he touched his ear and he healed him. Now in the book of John, I'm not going to go there for the sake of time, in the book of John, I think it's the book of John, it says that it was Peter that did this. Boisterous, confident, wavering Peter. Right? He's asleep in the garden, doesn't pray with Jesus. Right? This is the most climactic, important, basically event and basically in his whole life, or at least in the life of Christ, the life of his master. Jesus says, friend, wherefore art thou come? He basically calls his enemies friends. And he offers himself and he goes with them. But the disciples who didn't spend that time with God are not in the will of God. And they pull out a sword and they cut off somebody's ear, one of Jesus' enemies' ear. And Jesus heals the ear. Think about that for a minute. Another enemy, somebody that is basically with the group that is leading Jesus to his death, he actually makes an effort to heal that person's ear. Do you see that there's a little bit of a difference? A little bit of a difference between Christ in this last crisis hour experience and the disciples. Jesus enters into prayer, he communes with God, he receives the power of God. The disciples don't. Jesus forgives and loves his enemies. The disciples drew out swords and cut people's ears off. Jesus heals the ear. This is interesting stuff. Let's go to Matthew chapter 10 quickly. Just Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, verse 36. In the context here, I'm not going into great detail, but in the context here, Jesus is talking about the end times. Matthew chapter 10, verse 36. And a man's foes, enemies, shall be of his own household. Right? What Jesus is saying here, it's highly likely that your main enemies, right at the very end, will be people within your own family. People that are very, very close to you. We can see, as we understand the scriptures, this was basically, in a sense, like a crisis hour, a last day event hour for Jesus, right? And what happened to Jesus? One of the closest people to him actually becomes his betrayer. And Jesus is basically saying that there'll be people like that in our lives. There'll be people that will be close to you, maybe a family member or a very close acquaintance, and they might end up being your betrayer. What was Jesus' response to that betrayal? Friend. Friend. Forgiveness. Love and mercy. In these last days, brothers and sisters, God's true people that have entered into this experience, that have prepared themselves spiritually to go through with this experience, will actually love their enemies. I know it sounds crazy, I know it's hard, but it's a supernatural work that needs to be worked in your life, and if you ask God to do that work, He will do it in your life. He will empower you, He will change you, He will actually bring you to a place spiritually where you can truly, genuinely love your enemies, like Jesus did. Peter chopped off the ear, just acted like a fool. What happened? They all fled. So Jesus is completely forsaken. They all fled. Verse chapter 26. Verse 56. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. Then we read on about Peter's denial of Jesus. There's just so much here. So Judas betrays him. Peter chops off people's ears. He denies Jesus. They all flee. They all forsake Jesus. Remember at the beginning, they had an opportunity to watch him play. Do you think maybe their lives would have been a little bit different, or maybe what they did, or you could say the outcome for them would have been a little bit different in that experience if they watched him play with Jesus? See, if we sort of understand the symbolism here, you could say, between this experience that Christ and the disciples had and basically our lives and our experience, we can sort of draw from the story the conclusion that if we don't enter into that deeper experience with God, if we don't enter into that deep relationship with God now, when everything hits the fan, when push comes to shove, when the real test comes, when the real crunch takes place, we will either be a Peter or a Judas. But we have the opportunity to be a Jesus. Amen? We have the opportunity to be a Jesus in that last moment. Now, this is the point. This is the point. This is a good point. Jesus didn't get to the Gethsemane experience and then just randomly go, oh man, I need to start praying. Whoa. It basically, his whole life and his decisions and his sacrifices and his self-denial and all the time that he spent with the Lord led to that experience, so that when that time came, he was able to go to God. He had built that up, that relationship. He had cultivated that habit of coming to the Father no matter what. Right? Everybody leaves him. Everybody forsakes him. He comes to God. He continues that individual prayer life, that individual relationship with God. Brothers and sisters, it starts today. It starts now. And some of you might be discouraged, like I've been discouraged a lot, about my prayer life and my devotional life, and you think, man, I hardly ever pray. My devotional life sucks. My relationship with the Lord is all over the place. It's like a roller coaster. I'm up here and I'm down here and I'm all over the place. Don't let the enemy lie to you. Don't believe the enemy's lies. When the enemy comes to you and says, listen, you're no good. You're all over the show. There's no point even trying. Who cares? Just go with the flow. What we don't understand is that Jesus is actually all for us. He actually wants us to prosper. He actually has got arms outstretched, and he actually desires more than we could even understand or comprehend. He desires for us to enter into this deeper experience with him. And he will, if we are willing, if we ask, he will give us the power to consistently spend time with him and have that relationship with him. God is for us, not against us. Amen? Amen. And if God is for us, who can be against us, is what the Bible says also. We need to enter into that experience. And God is basically designed for us to enter into that experience, giving us that same opportunity that he gave the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's saying, watch and pray with me. Amen.